Welcome to Willing Warriors. This is episode 23. First time here. Glad to have you. If you've been here before, glad you came back. So I want to take up this topic of clothing or lack thereof. It's a provocative title, I know. Well, lack of clothing can also be provocative. So we want to really delve into this whole concept of clothing. As a first venue in, we want to start with Proverbs chapter 7, verse 10. Listen to what it says. And there a woman met him with the attire of a harlot, with the clothing of a harlot. So here we have, all throughout the book of Proverbs, we have this theme of a young man, be aware of the harlot, be aware of the harlot. And so what do we have? How do we know she's a harlot? Her clothing speaks of it. In fact, there's a picture of this young man, right? Or this father taking his son downtown. Probably not a 5-year-old. It's probably not a 25-year-old. It's probably a young man who's just coming into puberty, 13, 14, 15, right? Takes him somewhere and says, look, see that woman over there? She's a harlot. Stay away from her. And you're like, whew, how did he make that evaluation? Well, her clothing. Her clothing is loud. Her whole mannerism is loud. Look at me. So there are plenty of people today that wear a harlot's clothing. Now, they may be for sale and they may not be for sale, but regardless, they are screaming for attention. And so what we want to cover is, not only do we want to cover the harlot's clothing, but we want to cover all clothing, because Jesus is Lord of all. He's even Lord of our clothing choices. So maybe we can first start with criteria. Maybe you can help us with criteria how we can raise daughters who avoid wearing the harlot's clothing.
So I know this is quite a hot topic, a controversial topic, even amongst Christians. And just we might be going into this later, but I know that I've heard firsthand people say, not necessarily that they would be really, really revealing, but at the same time, I've heard young women say, I am not responsible for what that young man is thinking, or that old man is thinking, or whoever is thinking. That's between them and God. That's not my fault or whatever. And to a certain degree, yes, we're all responsible for our own thoughts and sins. But I would especially address Christian women of all ages, young and older, to consider how you dress and why that is important. And for me, modesty, first would and foremost, body parts are generally different than men's. And so most women have breasts and there's varying degrees and sizes, of course. So if you have something very deep cleavage, that shows the other body parts, or shorts that are too short or too tight, clothing that's very never did understand. I don't see it as much anymore, but there was a trend where they would write words right across the backside of especially girls or women's clothing, princess or whatever. And I'm like, why would you write words there? I mean, the draw is to read that, which is directing you right. I don't know. Never did understand that one. But so while our style was not necessarily the latest fashions and trends and everything, but because generally what was popular 20 years ago is probably going to be popular now. And that usually is the case. It just comes and goes around. And while we didn't dress our children, I don't recommend dressing women in flour sacks, and it just takes and it shows wisdom and discretion to make the clothing work. There's so many trends, though. There were years I couldn't even buy most of our clothing, at least for the girls and myself, in a retail store, because everything was so tight and short, and it was just difficult. We did for 2 reasons: for for just the budget. We would often shop when you have a larger family in thrift stores anyway. But then if we wanted to find modest dresses or skirts or something that just wasn't totally revealing, backless, up to, short dresses, we had to shop in thrift stores for the most part. Or if you're a good seamstress or learn how to sew your own clothing, that could also be, and it's also, so if you're not sure, is this, so if you're standing in front of a window with sun, you might be good to ask dad before you go out to church, is this modest or is it see-through or is this too short? Because I've grown a little bit. Or sometimes, a young lady just has to be pulled aside and said, I think you've outgrown that. And next time we wash it, let's put that either up for storage for the next daughter or give it away. So
it's good dads get involved. Help your wife, help your daughters to make an evaluation. Say, no, that doesn't quite qualify as modest. So this whole topic is full, as my wife mentioned it, right? It just churns because modern evangelical says, clothes don't matter. It's what's in my heart. And you know what? They have that part they have right. But that which is in your heart comes out. That which is in your heart comes out your mouth. That which is in your heart comes out in your clothing choices as well. So Jesus is Lord of all. And when we think about certain clothing choices, it should be a red flag. Something's going on in the heart that's not good. So God can evaluate the heart, but men can evaluate what's coming out of the mouth and the clothing choices. So heart, soul, mind, body are all connected. And so think about this. So I'm going to read something from Malachi chapter 1, verse 8. So it's talking about the sacrifices that we might give to God. And God's really displeased with the sacrifices that they were offering at this time. He says, and when you offer a blind animal as a sacrifice to God, is that not evil? He says, and when you offer the lame and sick, is that not evil? Now here's the litmus test. Would you give it to your governor? Oh, no. Would he be pleased with it? Would he be acceptable? Would this be acceptable to him? So now we're going to apply that principle to this, right? To clothing choices. So here you are. We get an invitation to come visit Buckingham Palace, the Queen, before she passed away. She wants to meet you. So how are you going to show up? You're going to show up in your greasy smock that you used to change the oil in your car. You're going to show up in a bikini. How are you going to show up? No, you're probably going to show up in whatever the nicest clothes you have. And so now here's the premise. We're going to meet God. So however much you evaluated the Queen and how honorable she was, God has got her beat by orders of magnitude. So in our own lifetime, what have we seen? We used to have, it was well understood, there were church clothes. Some of our best clothes we set aside for going to church on Sunday. Well, now God just meets me just how I am, right? And that's the whole premise. Yes, but what you're showing him is you don't really honor him as much as you would honor the governor or the queen or whatever. So our body and our clothes, they're all connected and they all speak. So maybe you can pick up on that. What are some ways clothing speaks?
Well, I mean, I would never allow the children to stay in pajamas past a certain point because we had to get on with our schoolwork and other things that we were doing. And I said, if I took you to the doctor's office, I said, what does a doctor wear? Or a nurse, if you go to the pediatrician, whatever. And he usually has the white coat and a stethoscope and, they sort of knew scrubs. They didn't know the right word for it, but they could describe or describe a fireman for me, right? Okay, so they could say, well, he would wear maybe a jacket and boots and, a red hat. And so they identified a person by what they wore. Could I put on a doctor's white jacket or a stethoscope? Does that make me a doctor? No, but you can still identify what that is. So consider a bride's wedding dress. Traditionally, when the bride entered the room to walk down the aisle, people would normally stand up, and the first, generally what they look at is, oh, her dress. She's dressed generally beautifully, often in white to speak of her purity, long and flowing, and she's the glory of man, right? And her dress may or may not, there are some that are bigger than others, fill the room, but it's definitely making a presence. It's making a statement. So it should highlight her femininity, that she's a woman, should highlight, but yet be modest. I always sort of cringe when, and I don't think I've ever attended a wedding, but when you have daughters that are looking for wedding dresses, some of the ones that, that are presented out in the stores or in the magazine, just like, wow, that doesn't leave much to the imagination. But anyway, the clothing is important. And, one set of clothing, if I'm going to go out and cut the grass, or if I'm going to put an apron on, if I'm going to work in the kitchen for whatever we're doing. And, somebody says, well, I don't own a nice dress or a suit. That's okay. Just wear what's clean and what is the best that you have. You're right. God's not going to turn you away because of your clothing. But at the same time, our goal is to show him honor and respect for who he is.
So God evaluates the heart, as modern evangelicals right to say. Man cannot. Yet, in God's word, we're encouraged to make evaluations of outward appearances of what is going on in the heart. So let's use two examples. One is a 3 or 4 year old, right? They're slamming doors, they're stomping their feet, they got a big scowl on their face. Parents are pretty sure they know what's going on in that heart, right? There's a whole lot of rebellion going on. So let's address the rebellion that's showing itself outward. And so clothing can be the same way. So let me read another passage. This is Proverbs chapter 24, verse 30 and 31. It says, I went by the field of a lazy man. So we're going to make an evaluation. And by the vineyard of a man devoid of understanding. And there it was, all overgrown with thorns. Its surface was covered with nettles. The stone wall is broken down. So the writer of Proverbs is making an evaluation. This man is a fool. He's not keeping his house in order. So here we are. We can make a conclusion about what is going on by outward appearances. We're making an evaluation of what's going on in the heart, not to judge someone, not to send them to hell, but we should be thinking about what statements am I making with my clothing? What statements are my kids making with their clothing? And so clothing is such a hot topic. So out there in this world, we have this thing called fad clothing that comes up in, as you mentioned, these cycles. So maybe you want to address fad clothing for us.
Well, yeah, traditionally we didn't go in for fad clothing, and I'm sure that people oh, I'm sure that's a homeschooling family, and they would be correct. And, so yeah, we were never probably considered the cool kids. And growing up, my parents didn't have a lot of money. I wore a lot of hand-me-downs, and, I was thankful my mom kept them clean, and so I guess it helped that I didn't grow up getting all the newest, even Levi jeans. I had to buy my own very first pair of Levi jeans, the one pair I probably ever owned. But yeah, you automatically pay 20% more just for the name or the label. I would say fad clothing generally is geared more towards young adults. We said the teen ages, especially seeking to be cool, part of the crowd. They don't want to look different than the others, which a lot of times, back in the 50s, they'd roll their sleeves up and have a pack of cigarettes. And a lot of times I think it was more for rebellion, to show, nobody's going to tell me what to do. But another example might be, well, if dad has really short cut hair, then the young man might say, well, I want to let my hair grow long. Or if dad has longer hair, the boy might say, well,
The rebellious son.
Well,
Right.
so I'm, going to be a skinhead. Often, dad, especially for young men, set the pace for the young men in the family. If dad wore a nice shirt and tie or suit or whatever, dress pants to work or to church, often the boys, the young men, the males in the house would follow dad's example. And, if mom and dad were able to provide that, that's what they would wear. So Sunday clothes, yeah, just oftentimes were set apart for Sundays. There were other occasions occasionally that we would wear them for, but it was our dress clothes.
Yeah, so the clothing reminded us that we went to church with, this is something different. It's something special. Let's set aside some clothes. So to add to more to what my wife was saying about fads, just pick one article of clothing. Jeans. She mentioned Levi's jeans, right? So in our lifetime, think of where this has gone. We saw bell bottoms, right? Talk about a serious trip hazard. We saw tight jeans. You couldn't hardly breathe, right? Then we saw designer jeans. Oh, you get somebody's name on the back of your buttocks, you got to pay 20% more. There was stonewashed jeans. There were hip hugger jeans. Most uncomfortable things I guess there ever were. There were droopy drawers. Man, some genius invented that, right? Droopy drawers. Let's wear our pants down below our buttocks. Then, now what's the latest one? I'm not even sure I'm up on the latest one. There's ripped jeans. Looks like someone just got in a fight with a bear. I'm laughing at all these because think about these trends and somebody says, well, that was so last year. Why keep up on it? Because you want to be included. You want to be identified. And so you want to be identified with a certain group. Well, who are we identified with? Who's our identity with? It's Christ. It's not with the cool kids. Well, if you can't make it with the cool kids, who did you go with, right? You went, maybe you wanted to hang out with the hippies. Maybe it was the heavy metal crowd that accepted you. Maybe it's the skinheads. Maybe it's the preppies. These are probably terms that don't even exist anymore. The grunge crowd, right? Being goth. Those that were unisex. Now the drag queens. Clothing is a uniform. It helps us to identify. But the people we want to identify with are Christ and his people. We don't need clothing for that. We need Christ for that. So young adults should want, if parents have won their heart, right? Won their heart. I'm with the modern evangelicals. It's about the heart, but it shows signs of what's going on the outward side, right? And we should look at those signs. We should seek to win their heart. And you know what? So my 15-year-old son's going to say, Dad, I want to be like you, right? And the daughters are going to want to follow mom's pattern in dress. They don't get together with their peers, pool their ignorance, right? And say, what do you think's cool, guys? Let's wear our pants down below our buttocks, right? So we want them to follow mom and dad's lead, not get together with those of their same age group. So we are dealing with outward stuff, but we're trying to address matters of the heart. So you want to take up some more of that?
Yeah. And once again, it's just so foundational at that tender and young age to win your child's heart from the earliest days. And children, they really don't need all the latest fads, all the stuff. They might think they do. I think a big one today is cell phones, electronics, the big ticket items. But they need you, mom and dad. They need your time. Not 100% doting on them, but love comes in so many different forms. It is setting boundaries, giving the security that they need. And they need parents to win their hearts. We have to be diligent. I know we just recently had a couple new little grandbabies born, and I feel for my daughters and my son-in-laws because I know that there are sleepless nights when they are up, and it's hard for them to sometimes even function the next day. But God gives grace; He gives strength. So win their hearts, be consistent as much as possible, and to love and hear mom's and dad's voices and commands and obey them. So somewhere in the future, we're going to discuss winning their heart so that they love to obey instead of just doing it out of duty. Duty is good, but to do it out of love, I guess the purpose of the heart.
Right. So if you don't win their heart, the world will. And especially, and where you see this fight really happening is at this, what we call young adult. Often other people might use the term teenagers. I don't particularly like that, but young adult years. So think about what's happening. So for the first, let's just say first 7 years, the young ones are learning. They're like sponges. They're just absorbing fact after fact, knowledge. So scripture says, get knowledge. And that's what they're doing. They're learning so much. Then they hit, let's say these middle years, we say 8 to 13. And now they've got their mind full of a bunch of connected information. And now they're starting to see how it all interconnects. And now they start asking questions. And you've been around kids like this, right? They're asking, but Dad, but why? But why? And they're full of these questions. And you start thinking, man, is that disrespectful? No, he's just wrestling with these. So then they hit, so get knowledge, get understanding how things are connected. And next is show forth wisdom. Wisdom is now, I've been learning, getting data, I've seen how it's connected. Now I want to apply it. I want to engage the world. I want to shape the world. I want to communicate back. That's what wisdom often looks like. I want to leave my imprint. So kids who have not been trained well to express themselves with words, to be able to build some kind of structure, some kind of make pottery, to make a painting, or put on a play, who don't know how to express themselves. They will express themselves. How do they express themselves? A can of spray paint on the bridge abutment. It's called graffiti. They're going to express themselves with, and have a tattoo artist tat them up, right? To show something about themselves. They're going to express themselves in clothing. They're going to say, this is who I am, right? This is what you should take example of. So clothing is a barometer of one of the barometers of what's going on in the heart. And so maybe an example, talked about the Marine example. You want to share that?
Yeah. So if you have a young man who's perhaps been rebellious or just not been loved in showing how to proper hygiene, how to make his bed, and he's just headed down a wrong path. And somewhere he signs up, I'm going to go to the military. So he signs up for the Marines, and talk about boot camp. And they cut his hair. They teach him how to make his bed. They require certain very distinct, expectations. And he comes back 9 months, 12 months later, and people don't even recognize him because he's learned how to care for himself, how to have respect for himself and to show respect to others. So our clothing choices do speak so much of, and it is not necessarily, it's not the all in all of who we are as a Christian. That is through Christ, but we do want to mirror, things that he brings forth in his word and who he is.
So let me end it this way, right? Our battle is not against flesh and blood. It's not against clothing, but it is against those things that would seek to take us hostage. And when they do take us hostage, we see it showing up in our language, our speech, and our clothing. So if it's gone into some weird place, a young lady who's got tremendous cleavage in everything she wears, a young man who's just absolutely unkept, or who's identifying with the liquor or the grunge or whatever, right? It just shows forth what is going on in their mind. And so what we want to do is we want to observe those red flags, and then we have to double back and win their heart for Christ. So here we are. Let's put this back in context. The outwards do matter because they point to the inward. And let's, on our knees as parents, go set the positive example as we enter into God's presence. Let's show him the honor and respect that's due his name. Maybe one last example. My wife mentioned a Marine. So imagine a private sitting there, and he's unkept. He's got his feet up on the table, and the general walks into the room. And he looks up at the general and he says, "General, I'm not going to stand. I'm not going to tuck my shirt in, but I want you to know, General, that I'm respecting you in my heart." the general is. Maybe in today's military, but in the former military, he's not going to put up with that. Slap his feet down, stand up, soldier, tuck your shirt in, right? So as we go into church, let us take and let's put on clothing that's appropriate. Let's have our mind and our heart and our body all connected. So until next time, thank you for joining us. Until next time, may God be gracious to you.